The slap was louder than the shatter of glass, and it ended her life as she knew it. The sound echoed across the glittering dining room of Le Bernardin, bouncing off marble columns and crystal chandeliers, piercing through the polite hum of clinking cutlery and low-voiced conversation. For a moment, even the waiters froze mid-step, balancing trays heavy with oysters and champagne. Elena Cross stood at the center of it all, her cheek burning where the hand had struck, her breath caught in her throat like a prisoner unwilling to be released. She had been invisible until now. A 23-year-old waitress, an orphan with no family name to cushion her fall, no legacy to shield her from humiliation. She had existed on the periphery of this world of velvet gowns and silk ties, a shadow gliding between linen-covered tables, unnoticed unless something went wrong. But in this instant, the instant the slap landed, Elena became the spectacle. At the table before her, Vivienne Moreau, one of New York's most ruthless socialites and financiers, sat rigid in her couture dress. A half-empty glass of Bordeaux trembled on the table, crimson liquid bleeding across the white linen, creeping like a wound that would not close. Her face was a mask of fury and disdain, lips painted like daggers, eyes sharpened with the satisfaction of destruction. "You clumsy girl," Vivienne hissed, her French accent slicing each syllable as if it were a blade. "You dare ruin a dress worth more than your life?" Gasps rippled through the room. A pair of hedge fund partners leaned forward, savoring the drama as if it were dessert. A Broadway star at the next table covered her mouth, feigning shock while her eyes glittered with voyeuristic thrill. The maitre d', pale and sweating, rushed forward, bowing his head to Vivienne with a servility that made Elena's stomach twist. I didn't," Elena began, voice trembling. Her hands clutched the empty tray against her chest like a shield. She remembered it clearly. She had leaned in to clear the table when Vivienne flicked her wrist, too sharp, sending the wine glass toppling. But the truth meant nothing here. In a place where money could twist reality, truth was always the first casualty. "Enough!" Vivienne's voice boomed. She rose halfway from her chair, her diamond necklace catching the light like a threat. "And now my ring!" A collective murmur swept the restaurant. Elena blinked, stunned. "Ring?" Vivienne thrust her manicured hand into the air, bare finger trembling with manufactured outrage. "My sapphire heirloom, gone. It was here, and now it is gone." Her eyes, cold and merciless, landed squarely on Elena. "And you, little thief, were the last one near me." Elena's stomach dropped into a pit of dread. Her cheek still stung from the slap, but this accusation cut deeper. Her entire body went cold, her breath shallow. "That's impossible," Elena whispered. Her voice, fragile as glass, dissolved in the roar of whispers rising around her. "Manager!" Vivienne snapped, pointing at Elena as though condemning her to execution. "Search her! At once!" The maitre d' hesitated, torn between the absurdity of the demand and the undeniable power of the woman issuing it. His eyes darted nervously around the room, catching the stares of high-paying patrons, then landed on Elena with a silent apology. "Miss Cross," he muttered, "please empty your pockets." Elena froze. "No, I didn't." "Do it," the maitre d' insisted under his breath. "Do it now, before she ruins us." Hands trembling, Elena set her tray on a side table. She reached into the pockets of her apron, pulling out a pen, a small notepad smudged with grease, and a crumpled Metro card, all she owned at that moment. Nothing else. Nothing of value. Nothing even close to a sapphire ring. But Vivienne's laughter cut through the silence like nails on glass. "Oh, how convenient. The thief hides it well. Perhaps in her bag, or under her blouse." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. The humiliation was unbearable. Every pair of eyes in the dining room drilled into her, stripping her dignity piece by piece. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but she was rooted to the spot, forced to endure the spectacle of her own ruin. The maitre d' cleared his throat, his voice brittle. "Elena Cross, you are hereby dismissed from Le Bernardin, effective immediately." The words fell heavier than the slap had. Dismissed. Just like that. No trial, no defense, no chance to speak. Her world collapsed in a single sentence. Vivian reclined back into her seat, smirking with the satisfaction of victory, while a waiter hurried forward to blot the wine from her gown. Elena, cheeks burning, felt her throat tighten with the threat of tears. She refused to let them fall here, not in front of this audience, not in front of Vivian. She turned, clutching her apron to her chest like armor, and walked out of the dining room. Each step felt like walking barefoot across shards of glass. The soft jazz from the restaurant's speakers sounded grotesque now, mocking her downfall. Outside, the night air hit her like a wave of ice. Times Square pulsed a few blocks away, neon lights flashing promises she would never afford. She stumbled onto the sidewalk, her knees weak, her heart pounding as if it wanted to flee her body. She had nothing left. No job, no money, barely a place to sleep. And now, a public disgrace to carry like a scar. She pressed her hand to her collarbone, desperate for something solid to hold on to. Her fingers brushed the edge of the one possession she had always carried, a small silver pendant shaped like a compass rose. It had been hers for as long as she could remember, the only object left with her at the orphanage. She didn't know where it came from, didn't know why she had it, only that it was hers. A talisman, a reminder that she was not completely lost. Her vision blurred with tears she could no longer hold back. She had given years to this job, late nights, double shifts, enduring sneers and commands, only to be discarded in an instant, destroyed by a lie. She pressed the pendant hard into her palm, as though the cold metal could anchor her. For now, it was the only thing keeping her from dissolving completely. And yet, as she disappeared into the dark streets of Manhattan, she had no idea that the pendant in her hand, this fragile relic of a forgotten past, had just drawn the gaze of someone watching from the shadows of the restaurant. Someone whose life, like hers, had been frozen in grief for 2 decades. Someone who, at the sight of that pendant, felt the earth shift beneath his feet. The night outside Le Bernardin was restless. Yellow cabs honked in frustration, headlights smeared against wet asphalt, and a thin mist clung to the glass towers of Midtown like smoke from an invisible fire. Elena Cross stumbled into the street, her apron balled in her hands, humiliation still hot on her skin. She had no clear destination, only the instinct to flee, as though shame itself were chasing her down 8th Avenue. The cold air made her breath sharp, and in the tremor of her steps, the chain around her neck snagged against her apron string. She tugged at it without looking. The clasp snapped, and with a faint metallic clink, the pendant she always wore slipped free. It tumbled once, twice, before landing on the pavement. The sound was small, just a drop of silver against stone. Elena bent quickly, scooping it up with trembling fingers, her pulse racing with the thought of losing the only thing that mattered to her. She pressed it to her chest, whispering under her breath as if to reassure herself, "Not you too, not you." What Elena did not know was that inside the restaurant, tucked away in a discreet corner behind a half-closed curtain, a man had witnessed everything. He had not been part of the dinner spectacle, not one of the laughing financiers or the whispering socialites. He had chosen his table for privacy, avoiding the light, letting the world of noise and glitter whirl around him unseen. Damien Hale did not belong to their world, though he could buy and sell it 10 times over. Billionaire. Tech visionary. Recluse. These were the words attached to his name in magazines and whispered conversations, but they were only shadows of the truth. He had built empires from nothing, dismantled competitors with a flick of strategy, and carried himself with a ruthlessness that made even Wall Street tremble. And yet tonight, he was not thinking of business. He had been sipping a glass of still water, watching Vivienne Moreau's theatrics with a mixture of boredom and contempt. He had seen people like her 1,000 times. Wealth wrapped in insecurity, cruelty sharpened into a performance. It was nothing new, nothing that stirred him, until the pendant fell. From his corner, Damien's eyes narrowed. The silver compass pendant glinted beneath the streetlight as Elena bent to retrieve it. For most, it would be just another trinket. But to Damien, it was a ghost. He had seen that pendant before. 2 decades earlier, when he was a young man with more promise than power, his family had boarded a yacht for a summer voyage off the coast of Maine. A sudden storm, a violent wreck, and the sea had swallowed his parents and his younger sister whole. Damien alone had been pulled from the freezing water, clinging to driftwood, broken and half-drowned. His sister, Isabella, had been wearing that pendant the day she disappeared. A silver compass rose, a birthday gift from their mother, engraved with letters only the family knew. For 20 years, Damien had lived with the certainty that she was gone, dead, buried in the silence of the sea. He had never stopped hearing her laugh in his dreams, never stopped waking in the middle of the night to the echo of her voice. The pendant was the last link. And now it was here, dangling from the neck of a waitress humiliated in front of New York's elite. His glass slipped in his hand. He barely noticed the water spilling across the tablecloth. His breath faltered. The air seemed to thin. "No," Damien whispered, too softly for anyone to hear. "It can't be." But it was. He had no doubt. Elena vanished into the dark beyond the glass doors, clutching the pendant. Damien rose from his table. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, startling the maitre d'. He ignored the stares, the murmurs, the whispers of recognition. "Is that Damien Hale?" And strode out into the night. On the sidewalk, Elena's pace quickened. The humiliation clung to her skin, heavier than the winter air. Every echo of laughter behind her felt like a knife twisting deeper. She pulled her coat tighter, trying to disappear into the city's veins. But Damien was already following. He did not approach her immediately. Instead, he kept a measured distance, his eyes locked on the glimmer of silver at her throat. Every step she took was another step into his past. His pulse pounded with a sensation he had not felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. Elena turned onto a quieter street, away from the neon chaos, toward the cheaper motels and crumbling apartment blocks where no one looked twice at a girl with a tear-streaked face. She stopped beneath a flickering street lamp, pressing her palms against the cold brick wall to steady herself. For the first time, she let herself cry. Not the restrained tears she had swallowed at the restaurant, but raw, gasping sobs that shook her shoulders and bent her body. She had nothing left to lose. Not her job, not her dignity, not even the tiny apartment she had been warned she'd soon be evicted from. Nothing except this pendant. The city roared around her. Taxis, sirens, footsteps. But she felt utterly alone. And then a shadow fell across her. Elena startled, spinning to face the man who had silently stepped into the circle of lamplight. He was tall, dressed in a dark overcoat that made him seem carved from the night itself. His face was pale, angular, with eyes that burned with something too intense to name. "Stay back," Elena said, her voice hoarse, defensive. She clutched the pendant tighter. Damien's eyes dropped to the compass rose. His throat tightened. He had rehearsed 1,000 conversations in his head if he ever saw that pendant again. But now, standing in front of the trembling young woman wearing it, The words scattered like birds startled into flight. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, urgent, almost desperate. Elena blinked. "What?" "The pendant," Damien said, stepping closer. "Where did you get it?" "It's mine," Elena shot back, her spine stiffening despite her fear. "It's always been mine." Damien inhaled sharply, his chest heavy with recognition. His hands trembled, though he kept them at his sides. "That pendant belonged to my sister," he said. "She wore it the night she disappeared." Elena shook her head, disbelief flashing across her face. "No, you're mistaken." But even as she said it, something inside her stirred. A faint, half-buried memory. Salt spray, a lullaby, a voice calling her name. She swallowed hard, shaking it off. "I don't know what you're talking about." Damien studied her face, every line, every flicker of emotion. The resemblance was subtle, but it was there. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. He had seen them once in the mirror of his childhood. His voice broke into steel. "I need your name. Your full name." Elena's lips trembled. She wanted to run, but something about the force of his presence pinned her in place. "Elena. Elena Cross." Damien's eyes narrowed. Cross. Not her name, not truly. He was certain of it. "You're coming with me," he said. Elena recoiled. "No. I don't know you, and I don't owe you anything." For a moment, they stood locked in a silent standoff, her fear colliding with his desperate certainty. And then, from the far end of the street, a group of laughing men spilled out of a bar, their voices rowdy, their eyes already drawn to Elena like predators spotting prey. She stiffened, instinctively stepping back into the circle of Damien's shadow. He glanced at the men, then back at her, his jaw tightening. "You don't trust me. Fine. But you can't survive this city alone. Not anymore." "Let me help you." Elena's breath hitched. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave her alone, but the weight of his words pressed deep into the hollow of her chest. She turned away, clutching the pendant until its edges cut into her palm. "I don't need anyone," she whispered. And with that, she fled again into the darkness, leaving Damien standing beneath the street lamp, his pulse still hammering. But for the first time in 2 decades, Damien Hale felt something he thought had died with the sea, hope. And he swore to himself, as the night swallowed her figure whole, he would find her again, whatever it cost. The clock above the maitre d's station ticked softly in the otherwise hushed private office of Le Bernardin. The room, normally reserved for discreet conversations with investors and Michelin inspectors, now carried the suffocating weight of one man's presence. Damien Hale did not shout. He did not need to. He stood by the polished oak desk, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the manager who sat trembling in his chair. The faint light from the desk lamp caught the edge of Damien's face. Sharp cheekbones, jaw set like stone, eyes as cold and steady as a winter sea. Across from him, Maurice Delacroix, general manager of Le Bernardin, fumbled with his cufflinks as though tightening them would somehow anchor him to control. He had dealt with demanding patrons before. Entitled hedge fund heirs, film stars with fragile egos, senators who believed the world owed them silence, but none of them carried the suffocating gravity of Damien Hale. "You don't understand," Maurice stammered, his French-accented English slipping as his nerves unraveled. We protect our staff files. It is policy. Confidential." Damien leaned forward, one hand pressing flat on the desk. The sound was deliberate, heavy, final. "You have 60 seconds, he said quietly. "And then I will walk out of here and make a single call. By morning, this restaurant will be stripped of its stars, your suppliers will withdraw, and your name will be synonymous with scandal." Maurice paled. "Monsieur Hale, please." Damien's eyes flicked to the brass clock on the wall. 55. Silence thickened like smoke. The manager's breath came fast and shallow. He could hear the muffled clatter of plates from the kitchen beyond, the faint laughter of guests in the dining room, normalcy on the other side of the door. But here, in this office, he felt as though the world had shrunk to a single battlefield, himself and Damien Hale. "You don't even know what you're asking," Maurice said, desperation creeping into his tone. "She is nothing. A waitress, a girl, fired already. What could you possibly want with her?" Damien's gaze cut through him. "Her file." Maurice swallowed. "But 45. The seconds fell like stones into water. Maurice's palms grew slick. He had heard rumors about Hale, how he had crushed competitors in the tech world, dismantled entire empires without raising his voice. Men with 10 times Maurice's power had been reduced to ashes with a single meeting. And now those glacier-cold eyes were fixed on him. "Her name," Damien continued, "her address, her history, everything." Maurice shifted uncomfortably. "You cannot threaten me like this." Damien straightened, his expression unchanging. "This is not a threat. This is the future you are walking into unless you comply." He reached into his coat, pulling out his phone. 30. Maurice's composure cracked. He saw it then. The inevitability, the weight of a man who had never bluffed in his life. Damien Hale was not here to posture. He was here to dismantle. "Please," Maurice whispered, his voice breaking. "If I give you this, I betray the confidentiality of my staff. I could lose everything." Damien's eyes narrowed. "You already have." The finality in those words hollowed Maurice's chest. His hands trembled as he reached for a drawer in his desk. A small key turned, unlocking the cabinet where employee files were kept in neat manila folders. He hesitated, glancing once at Damien as though hoping for reprieve. There was none. Slowly, he pulled out a thin folder marked Cross, Elena. He slid it across the desk with shaking hands. Damien took it without ceremony. His long fingers opened the folder, scanning the sparse contents. Employment forms, a copy of her ID, a worn address scribbled in fading ink. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to begin. For the first time in years, Damien felt his pulse quicken not with business or battle, but with something deeper. The pull of family, of possibility. "Good choice," he murmured. Maurice sagged back into his chair, sweat beading his temples. "Monsieur Hale, why? Why her?" Damien's eyes flicked up, his expression unreadable. "Because sometimes, even in a city built on lies, the truth appears where you least expect it." Without another word, he tucked the folder into his coat and turned toward the door. The weight of his presence lingered even as he left, as though the air itself had been altered. Maurice sat frozen long after, the echo of Hale's voice still reverberating in his ears. Outside, the city was still alive with its midnight pulse. Damien stepped into the crisp air, folder pressed against his chest. He walked with measured steps, though inside his heart thundered with urgency. Each page of that file represented a thread leading back to the girl who carried his sister's pendant, the girl who might be the answer to 20 years of silence. He stopped beneath a streetlight, flipping open the folder once more. Name, Elena Cross. Age, 23. Address, West 41st Street, Apt 3B. Employment history, waitress, Le Bernardin, 3 years. Prior, part-time at various diners. Emergency contact, none. No family, no ties. A ghost in the system. Damien's chest tightened. He knew ghosts. He had lived among them for 2 decades, but this one was flesh and blood, and he would not let her vanish. Hours later, the door to Elena's apartment rattled with fists. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her uniform, eyes swollen from crying, clutching the pendant until her knuckles turned white. The pounding grew louder. "Elena Cross! Open up!" It wasn't Damien's voice. It was the landlord, flanked by 2 men in gray suits. "Final notice. You're behind 3 months. Tonight you're out." Her chest collapsed inward. She wanted to scream, to beg, but the words stuck. She had nothing left. Nothing to barter, nothing to hold them back. Within minutes, she was on the street again, clutching a single bag. The rest of her belongings locked inside forever. From across the avenue, Damien watched. He had not intervened. Not yet. He needed to see how she moved when stripped of everything, how she carried the weight of survival. And as she disappeared down the block, her figure swallowed by shadows, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Back in his penthouse that night, Damien spread the thin file across his desk. Manhattan glittered beyond the glass walls, indifferent and endless, but Damien's focus was narrow as a blade. He traced the address with his finger. She would not be there anymore. But she would be somewhere, and he would find her. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from his assistant. Everything in place, awaiting orders. Damien typed 2 words. Find her. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the silver compass pendant engraved forever in his memory. For 20 years, it had pointed nowhere. But tonight, for the first time, it pointed north. The hallway outside apartment 3B still smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. A flickering bulb cast the peeling wallpaper in sickly yellow light, shadows stretching long and thin across the floorboards. 2 men in tailored coats moved down the corridor, their polished shoes far too refined for this building. They stopped in front of the battered door, exchanged a glance, and knocked. No answer. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, pressed his ear against the door. Silence. Only the low hum of a faulty radiator from inside. He straightened, then rapped again, louder this time. "Miss Cross? We need to speak with you." Still nothing. The second man sighed, pulled a set of lockpicks from his pocket, and made quick work of the cheap bolt. The door creaked open, revealing a single-room apartment stripped bare of warmth or personality. The mattress was on the floor, thin blanket crumpled at the corner. A kettle sat cold on the counter. A single glass by the sink, but no Elena. The silver-haired man stepped inside, scanning the room with sharp eyes. He moved toward the window, found it cracked open, curtains fluttering in the cold wind. She had left. And recently. "She knew we'd come," he muttered. The other man nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to track her elsewhere." Hours earlier, Elena Cross had sat on that same mattress, clutching her pendant so tightly it left an imprint in her palm. The eviction had left her shaken, but not surprised. She had lived her entire life waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the fragile scaffolding of her survival to collapse. Tonight, it had. She stuffed the few belongings she could into a worn duffel bag. A spare uniform, a pair of sneakers, a tattered paperback she had read a dozen times, and the pendant. Always the pendant. She considered leaving it behind once, a foolish thought that came and went like a ghost. But the moment she tried to imagine herself without it, her chest tightened with panic. No. Whatever else she lost, the pendant stayed. She pulled her coat tighter and slipped out the back stairwell, avoiding the front entrance where the landlord might be lurking. The city swallowed her instantly. Cold wind, neon blur, the endless churn of traffic. She walked for hours with no direction, only the urgent need to stay ahead of whatever seemed to be closing in on her. By the time Damien's men arrived at her apartment, Elena was already blocks away, her figure vanishing into the labyrinth of New York like smoke dispersing into night. Damien Hale sat in the back of his black sedan, the thin folder of Elena's life open across his lap. He had dispatched his team minutes after retrieving the file, expecting them to bring her in quietly. But the call he received now made his jaw tighten. "Gone," the silver-haired man reported. "She slipped out before we arrived. Window open, no sign of forced entry. She knew." Damien's eyes darkened. He closed the folder slowly, the leather seat creaking beneath him. "She's not supposed to vanish," he said quietly. "Not her." The driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, catching the dangerous calm in Damien's expression. When Hale spoke like this, it usually meant something, or someone, was about to be erased. But Damien wasn't angry in the way others expected. He was unsettled. For 20 years, his life had been a map of control, acquisitions, mergers, dismantling competitors piece by piece. But this was different. Elena was a ghost with his sister's pendant. Every moment she eluded him, he felt as though he was losing Isabella all over again. "Expand the search," he ordered. "Credit cards, transit passes, hospital records, anything. She can't just disappear." But Elena had already disappeared into places Damien's people never thought to look. She spent that night riding the subway with no destination, dozing against the window, waking at every stop. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, the car half empty except for a homeless man mumbling to himself and a teenager blasting music through broken earbuds. It wasn't safe, but it was movement. And movement meant survival. At dawn, she climbed the steps into the gray light of morning, her stomach hollow from hunger. She wandered aimlessly until she found herself in front of a pawn shop with grime-clouded windows. She hesitated at the door, clutching the pendant beneath her coat. She could sell it. The thought pressed against her like a hand at her back, urging her forward. She had no money, no home, no job. The pendant could buy her a week, maybe 2. Enough to leave the city, to vanish for good. She stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and rusted metal. Behind the counter, a man with thinning hair and cigarette-stained fingers looked up from a newspaper. "What you got?" Elena swallowed. Slowly, she pulled the chain from her neck and set the pendant on the counter. The man picked it up, squinting at the design. He ran a thumb across the compass rose, tracing the engraved letters. For a moment, his brows lifted. "This ain't costume," he muttered. "Old. European, maybe. Where'd you get it?" "It was my mother's," Elena lied, her voice tight. The man grunted, turning it over again. "Mark here says Geneva. Swiss work. Could fetch something, but not here. Not fast." Geneva. The word lodged itself in Elena's mind, heavy with significance. She had never thought about the origins of the pendant before. Now it was like a key turning in a locked door, hinting at a history beyond her reach. "How much?" she asked quickly. The man shook his head. "Not enough for you. If you're desperate, maybe 200 cash. But you're better off keeping it." Elena's stomach dropped. 200 wouldn't save her. Not really. And yet she hesitated to take it. Something about the word Geneva rooted her feet to the floor. "Forget it," she whispered, snatching the pendant back. By the next night, Elena had taken shelter in a church basement converted into a makeshift hostel. Rows of metal cots, blankets piled high, the faint smell of disinfectant and unwashed clothes. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the pendant clutched tightly in her hand. Memories flickered at the edge of her mind, waves crashing, voices shouting, a lullaby she couldn't quite place. She pushed them away, telling herself it was only exhaustion playing tricks. But she couldn't shake the word, Geneva. She whispered it aloud, testing its sound. It felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like a word she had once known but forgotten. Across the city, Damien Hale stood in his penthouse before a wall of monitors. Satellite maps, security feeds, credit card logs. His team worked silently, piecing together fragments of Elena's movements. But she had left no digital trace. Damien stared at the frozen still of her face from a restaurant camera, her eyes wide with humiliation as Vivian struck her. He traced the image with his gaze, his chest tightening with something dangerously close to grief. "She's alive," he whispered to himself, "and she is not disappearing again." He turned sharply to his assistant. "Put someone on every hostel, every shelter, every soup kitchen. She will surface. And when she does..." His voice dropped into steel. "Bring her to me." But for now, Elena Cross had vanished. To the city, she was another nameless girl swallowed by the streets. To Damien, she was the compass his life had been waiting for. And somewhere in the fragile threads of memory beginning to stir within her, the truth was waiting. A truth written not only in the pendant she carried, but in the blood that bound them both to the sea. The city glittered in the cold night as if mocking the truth buried beneath its glass towers. Damien Hale stood by the window of his penthouse, Manhattan stretching endlessly before him, the streets glowing with wealth and power. But his eyes weren't on the skyline. They were on the blue folder in his hands, filled with documents his investigators had delivered just hours ago. On the surface, the file read like an obituary for a life built on lies. Bank statements drenched in red. Auction receipts stamped default. Jewelry appraisals, false, inflated, contradictory. And finally, the most damning page, a lab analysis of the so-called sapphire heirloom Vivian Moreau had flaunted in front of half of New York's elite. Cubic zirconia. Damien's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. He had suspected Vivienne's drama at Le Bernardin was nothing more than theater, a carefully staged accusation meant to mask something else. But the proof was still staggering. A woman who paraded through galas draped in diamonds and rubies was, in truth, drowning in debt, clinging to her illusions with manicured claws. The slap that had shattered Elena's dignity wasn't about spilled wine. It was about a cover-up. And Elena had been chosen as the perfect scapegoat, a waitress, an orphan. No one to defend her, no one to ask questions. Damien's hands tightened on the file. Rage simmered beneath his ribs. Not rage for himself, but for Elena, the girl who carried the pendant that might bind her to his blood. She had been humiliated, discarded, and nearly destroyed to protect Vivian's crumbling empire of lies. No more. The next morning, Damien stepped out of his car in front of the Moreau Foundation headquarters. Cameras clicked, heads turned, and whispers spread like wildfire. Damien Hale rarely appeared in public without purpose. Inside, the marble lobby was filled with silence that bent under the weight of his presence. Assistants froze mid-step. Security guards straightened, unsure whether to intervene or step aside. None dared approach him as he strode toward the elevator. Vivienne Moreau was already in her office, lounging behind her glass desk with the Manhattan skyline behind her like a crown. She was dressed in a silk blouse, her wrists glittering with stacked bracelets that sparkled under the light. To the untrained eye, she was untouchable. To Damien's, she was a drowning woman clutching fake jewels. When the door opened and Damien walked in without knocking, her eyes widened just slightly. She masked it quickly, sitting taller, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Hale, she purred. What a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? Damien set the folder on her desk with quiet precision. His gaze cut into her like a blade. Pleasure has nothing to do with it. Vivian's smile faltered, but only for a moment. She leaned forward, flipping the folder open with feigned curiosity. Her fingers skimmed the first page and then the second. With each line, the blood drained from her face. Bankruptcy notices. Overdue loans. Auction houses refusing her credit. Appraisals exposing her jewelry as forgeries. Finally, the lab report. Her sapphire heirloom. Cubic zirconia set in silver washed with rhodium. Worthless. Vivian's hands trembled. She snapped the folder shut, forcing a laugh. What is this? Fabrications? Lies? Surely you don't believe... Damien cut her off with a single word. Enough! His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a gavel. Vivian's laugh died in her throat. You humiliated an innocent girl in front of this city's elite to protect yourself, Damien continued. You staged a theft to claim insurance, and you chose a scapegoat who had nothing to defend her but her silence. That was your mistake. Vivian's composure cracked. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Damien said, stepping closer. His shadow loomed across her desk, swallowing her in its cold reach. You are bankrupt. You are desperate. And you thought no one would dare challenge you. But you were wrong. For the first time in years, Vivienne Moreau looked afraid. Truly afraid. Please, she whispered, her voice brittle. I had no choice. The debts, the foundation, the appearances I must keep. Damien's eyes narrowed. You had a choice, and you chose to ruin her. Vivian's eyes welled with tears, smudging the careful paint of her mascara. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice cracking. Damien studied her for a long moment, then leaned forward until his words brushed the air like steel. I want you to make this right. Vivian blinked, startled. How? You will help me find her, Damien said. Elena Cross, the girl you destroyed to save yourself. You will dedicate every resource you have left, every contact, every ounce of influence to bringing her back into the light. And if you refuse... He paused, his gaze sharp as a blade. I will dismantle what's left of you so completely that your name will vanish from this city's memory. Vivian's breath hitched. For once, her voice failed her. Damien straightened, slipping the folder back under his arm. The girl you tried to erase will become the woman who defines you, either as the one you saved or the one who sealed your downfall. Vivian collapsed into her chair, sobbing quietly. Her world of illusions had cracked, and there was no patching it now. Damien turned and walked out of the office without looking back. That night, Damien stood again at his window, the city glowing beneath him. He thought of Elena wandering the streets, clutching her pendant, unaware of the storm building behind her, unaware of the truth etched into that small piece of silver. Vivienne Moreau was finished. Her empire was smoke and mirrors, and soon all of New York would know it. But Elena was still out there, the vanishing waitress. The ghost in the city. Damien's hand tightened around the glass of scotch he hadn't touched. He would find her, no matter how far she ran, no matter how deep she hid. Because the truth was no longer buried, and the compass had begun to point home. Vivienne Moreau had been summoned to many offices in her lifetime. Judges, bankers, senators, the occasional billionaire whose money she needed more than they needed her. She had always walked in with her chin high, her smile sharp, and her lies rehearsed. Power was about appearance, she had always told herself. If you looked unbreakable, you were. But when the black car pulled up in front of the Hale Global Tower and two men in tailored suits ushered her into the lobby without a word, Vivian felt the first tremor of unease. The tower itself was steel and glass, a needle stabbing into the clouds, every floor humming with the kind of authority that no amount of couture could match. By the time she was led to the top floor, her palms were damp. The elevator doors slid open onto a hallway of quiet opulence. Dark marble floors, abstract art, the faint scent of leather and cedar. At the end of the hall, a pair of double doors waited. One of the men knocked once and opened them. "Mr. Hale will see you now." Vivian stepped inside. Damien Hale's office stretched out before her like a cathedral of glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline the city lights glittering like fallen stars. A single desk sat near the center, sleek and unadorned, papers arranged with military precision. Behind it stood Damien himself, tall, immovable, his presence filling the room more than the architecture ever could. Vivian forced a smile. "Damien, such a dramatic summons. You might have called me directly." Damien didn't smile back. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." The word was simple, but it carried a weight that pressed on Vivian's chest. She obeyed, sinking into the leather chair with forced grace. Damien walked around the desk and placed a folder in front of her. The same folder she had seen before. He opened it with deliberate slowness, letting the damning pages breathe in the air between them. Bankruptcies, forgeries, the lab report on her fake sapphire ring. "This," Damien said quietly, "is your empire." Vivian's throat tightened. "Damien, listen." "No!" His voice cut her off like a blade. "You've lied enough. To your investors, to your donors, to the city, and worst of all, to yourself. But this time..." He leaned closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You crossed a line." Vivian's pulse spiked. She tried to hold his gaze, but it was like staring into the heart of a storm. "You humiliated an innocent woman," Damien continued. "A woman who had nothing. You made her your scapegoat to protect your lie. And you enjoyed it." Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came. The memory of the slap at Le Bernardin flashed in her mind. Elena's wide, shocked eyes, the gasp of the crowd, the cruel satisfaction Vivian had felt in that moment. It had been intoxicating then. Now it was poison. Damien slid another paper across the desk. It was a signed statement from a jeweler who had appraised Vivian's collection. The signature glared at her like a sentence. "You don't just face ruin," Damien said. "You face prison." Vivian's body went cold. "I can make one call," Damien continued. "By morning, your name will be splashed across every front page in New York. Fraud, liar, con artist. Your friends will vanish. Your foundation will collapse. Your future will be nothing." Her vision blurred. She gripped the edge of the chair to steady herself. "Please," she whispered. "Damien, I was desperate. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just..." Her voice broke into sobs she could no longer contain. "I just couldn't lose everything." Damien's expression didn't soften. "You already have. And the only reason you are not in handcuffs this moment is because I see a use for you." Vivian blinked through tears. "A use?" "You will help me find her," Damien said, his voice low and absolute. "Elena Cross. You will dedicate every resource you have left, every contact in this city, every favor you can call in, to bring her to me. Do that, and I will let you breathe another day. Fail, and you will not just lose your empire, you will lose your name." Vivian trembled. She had spent her life destroying others before they could destroy her. Now she was the one cornered with no escape.
"You don't understand," she whispered. "I don't know where she is."
Damien leaned closer, his face inches from hers, his eyes colder than winter steel. Then you will learn. You will scrape this city until your hands bleed, because unlike you, she matters. Vivian's tears spilled freely. For the first time, she saw herself as she truly was, a woman draped in jewels that weren't real, standing before a man who could shatter her illusions with a word. "Do you understand me?" Damien asked. Vivian nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes. Say it. I will find her." Damien straightened, the storm in his gaze unyielding. "Good. Because the girl you tried to erase is the girl who will decide your fate." Vivian lowered her head, shoulders shaking. She had thought she was untouchable, but in this office, under Damien Hale's gaze, she was nothing. Hours later, Vivian sat alone in the back of a cab, her reflection trembling in the window as the city streamed by. She dabbed at her ruined mascara with a trembling hand. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was like to be powerless. Her phone buzzed. A message from Damien's office. "Every lead you uncover, every whisper you hear, report to me first. You are on a leash now. Do not test it." Vivian's stomach knotted. She thought of Elena, the waitress she had slapped, the girl she had accused. She had thought of her as nothing, disposable. But now Elena was everything. Vivian whispered the name into the silence of the cab. Elena Cross. And for the first time, the name tasted like judgment. Meanwhile, Damien stood by his window again, Manhattan burning beneath him in lights and shadows. He thought of Elena wandering somewhere in the city, clutching her pendant, unaware of the forces circling her. He thought of his sister's laughter, swallowed by the sea 20 years ago. He thought of the compass pendant that refused to vanish. And he whispered to the night, "I will find you." The West End shelter smelled faintly of disinfectant and old blankets. Rows of metal-framed cots stretched across the dim basement hall, the air heavy with exhaustion and stale coffee. Elena sat hunched on the edge of one of them, her duffel bag at her feet, her coat drawn tight around her shoulders. The city had wrung her dry. Since the night at Le Bernardin, she had lived like a ghost, drifting from subway benches to church basements, clutching her silver pendant as if it were a pulse. But tonight she had decided it was time to leave New York behind. She had scraped together enough coins for a bus ticket. Not far, maybe upstate, maybe farther. Anywhere but here. Anywhere the shame couldn't follow. Where Vivian Moreau's accusations wouldn't echo in strangers' whispers. She had written her name on the shelter's sign-out sheet, stuffed her last few belongings into her duffel, and was waiting for the bus station to open at dawn. But fate, she would soon learn, had other plans. Across the city, Damien Hale's black sedan slid silently through the streets. Inside, Damien leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the tablet his assistant held out. A map of Manhattan glowed on the screen, dotted with pins representing shelters, soup kitchens, and hostels. "West End Community Shelter logged her name last night," his assistant said. "She signed in at 11:43 p.m. No sign out yet." Damien's heart gave a heavy, uneven beat. After days of chasing shadows, here was a name on paper, ink on a line. Proof she was still within reach. "Take me there," Damien ordered. At the shelter, Elena stood, slinging the duffel over her shoulder. She checked the clock above the doorway. 5:12 a.m. The bus station would be stirring soon. She took one last look at the cot, the peeling paint on the walls, the women still curled beneath thin blankets. She felt a pang of guilt. She was leaving, but so many would remain. She pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the exit. The door swung open before she could reach it. A tall figure filled the frame, backlit by the street lamp beyond. His coat was dark, his presence so heavy it seemed to draw the air from the room. For a moment, Elena froze, the duffel strap digging into her shoulder. Damien Hale stepped inside. Her breath caught. She had seen him once before outside Le Bernardin when he had asked about her pendant with a desperation that scared her. She had fled then. And yet here he was again, as if the city itself bent to his will. "Elena," Damien said quietly, his voice roughened by hours without rest. "Don't run this time." Her pulse raced. "How do you even know my name?" He stepped closer, his gaze falling to the pendant at her throat. "Because I've been searching for you. Because that pendant—" His voice broke, steadied again. "Belonged to my sister." Elena shook her head, clutching the pendant as if he might rip it from her. "No, you're mistaken. This is mine. It's always been mine." Damien's eyes softened, but his intensity did not waver. "Look at it closely. On the back. 4 letters engraved." Elena hesitated. Slowly, she turned the pendant over in her palm. In the flickering light, she saw them. 4 tiny letters etched into the silver, letters she had noticed before but never understood. IHHL. Her chest tightened. "What does it mean?" Damien swallowed. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled at his sides. "Isabella Hale, my sister, lost 20 years ago in a shipwreck off the Maine coast. That pendant was hers." Elena stared at him, the weight of his words crashing into her. Isabella Hale. She had never known her birth name. She had grown up in an orphanage with nothing but this pendant. Could it really mean— "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's impossible." But even as she said it, memories stirred. Salt spray. A lullaby sung in a woman's voice. A man's laughter. A storm. And then darkness. Her knees nearly buckled. Damien stepped forward, catching her arm. His voice dropped, raw. "It's not impossible. It's you." Elena looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "Why me? Why now?" "Because I've searched for 20 years, Damien said, "and I will not lose you again." The shelter director, a tired woman with kind eyes, appeared in the doorway, startled by the sight of Damien Hale standing in her basement. "Sir, you can't just—" Damien pulled a thick envelope from his coat and set it on the desk. "For your work. For everyone here. No questions asked." The woman glanced at the envelope. Then at Elena, then back at Damien. She saw the desperation in his face, the disbelief in Elena's, and decided not to intervene. She nodded once. "Take care of her." Minutes later, Elena found herself in Damien's car, the city blurring past the windows. She sat stiffly, the pendant cold against her skin, her mind spiraling. Damien sat across from her, his hands folded, eyes never leaving her face. He studied her as if memorizing every line, every flicker of doubt. "I don't want your money," Elena said finally, her voice hoarse. "If this is about charity—" "This is not charity," Damien cut in. "This is blood, family, truth." The word family landed heavy in Elena's chest. It was a word she had never been able to claim. Not really. She had been alone for as long as she could remember. To hear it now from this man, this stranger who claimed to be her brother, was unbearable. "I can't just believe you," she whispered. "I can't." Damien leaned forward. His voice was quiet but unyielding. "Then let me prove it." Back at Hale Tower, Damien led her into his private office. He opened a safe behind the desk and pulled out a small box. Inside lay a silver ring, simple but elegant, engraved with the same compass rose as her pendant. "This was the pair," Damien said, holding it out. "Our mother had them made for Isabella's birthday. She wore the pendant. I kept the ring." Elena stared at the ring, her heart pounding. It was identical. The same design, the same engraving. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. For a moment she swore she could hear that lullaby again, faint as an echo through time. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Damien's voice cracked with something rare, something fragile. "Believe me. Believe the blood that binds us. You are Isabella, my sister. The sea took you from me once, but fate has brought you back, and I will never let you vanish again." Elena closed her eyes, clutching the pendant and the ring together in her palms. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of belonging pressing against the emptiness inside her. And though her mind resisted, her heart whispered the truth. She was not Elena Cross. She was Isabella Hale. 2 decades of silence shattered with 4 engraved letters. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the city outside the glass walls. Isabella, sat at Damien's desk, her hands trembling as she clutched the pendant in one palm and the silver ring in the other. The metal felt alive, burning cold, as though it carried the weight of 1,000 nights at sea. The engraved letters on the back of the pendant seemed to glow under the lamplight. IHHL, Isabella Hale. She had read them dozens of times growing up in the orphanage, turning the pendant over and over in her small hands, asking herself if they meant anything at all. She had been told they were meaningless, just scratches from the silversmith, a decoration. But now, with Damien standing before her, eyes haunted and unflinching, the truth broke open like a wave smashing against rock. "Isabella," Damien said softly, as if speaking the name aloud might break her. "It was always you." Her throat tightened. "No, I don't remember. I can't—" "You do," Damien interrupted, his voice low but firm. "It's there, beneath the years, beneath the pain. You just haven't let yourself look." He turned away, walked to the window, and pressed his hand against the cold glass as if steadying himself against a memory too heavy to carry. "It was summer," he began, his voice distant, raw. "We were sailing off the coast of Maine. Father at the helm, Mother singing to you while you played on deck. You had just turned 3. You wore that pendant everywhere. You wouldn't take it off, not even to sleep." Elena closed her eyes, her heart thundering. 3 years old. A lullaby. A fragment of melody whispered through her mind, faint as the sound of wind through reeds. She didn't know the words, only the rhythm. "Then the storm came," Damien continued, his tone breaking. "Waves like walls. The yacht splintered. I remember holding on to the mast, Father shouting orders, Mother clutching you in her arms, and then—" His voice faltered. "The sea took them. Took you." He turned back, his eyes wet but burning. "I searched for you until the water pulled me under. I woke up in a rescue boat, alone. They told me you had drowned, that there was no chance a child could survive in that storm." His jaw tightened. "I believed them. For 20 years I lived with that guilt, that I hadn't been strong enough to hold on to you." Silence pressed between them, heavy and suffocating. Elena, Isabella, sat frozen, tears sliding down her cheeks. She wanted to speak, but her tongue felt made of stone. Then, like a crack in a dam, a memory surfaced. Cold, salt in her throat. A woman's scream swallowed by thunder. Arms around her holding her tight. A melody in her ear, broken, frantic. "Sleep, my star. The sea will rest. Close your eyes on Mother's breast."
The memory fractured into darkness, but it was enough to send a sob tearing from her chest. She bent forward, clutching the pendant against her lips as if it might steady her. Damien crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, his large hands trembling as he touched her shoulders. "You remember, don't you?" She nodded through tears. "I hear singing. I hear her, and then nothing." Damien closed his eyes, swallowing hard. He pressed his forehead against her arm as though anchoring himself to the truth of her presence. "Isabella, my sister." The words felt like both a prayer and an anchor, holding them in place after years of drifting. When she finally looked up, her voice was small, but resolute. "If I'm Isabella Hale, why was I left? Why did no one come for me?" Damien inhaled sharply, guilt heavy in his chest. "We searched for weeks. The Coast Guard, private divers, search teams. They found nothing. I believed you were gone. I was told there was no hope. And He broke off, his voice cracking. "I was weak enough to believe them." Elena shook her head, gripping the pendant. "I remember water. Then, I woke up somewhere else. White walls, a nurse saying I was lucky. But they didn't know my name. They just wrote me down as unknown child, no ID, no family. I ended up in the system." Her voice hardened. "I grew up with no one, no answers, just this pendant." Damien's heart twisted. He had spent 2 decades building towers of steel and empires of glass to keep his grief at bay. But here she was, the proof that all those years were wasted chasing shadows, when his own blood had been breathing somewhere in the same world. "I failed you," he said, his voice hollow, "and I will never forgive myself for it." Elena's tears slowed. She studied him. This man who radiated power, whose name was whispered like legend, yet whose shoulders now sagged under the same weight she had carried her whole life. For the first time, she saw not a billionaire, not a stranger, but a brother. They sat in silence for a long while, the city lights flickering below like restless stars. Finally, Elena whispered, "Tell me about them." "About our parents." Damien drew a shaky breath. His eyes softened, and for a moment the hardness of his features melted. "Father was stubborn, brilliant, but stubborn. He taught me to sail before I could swim. And Mother? She had a voice. She sang to us every night. Even when the storms came, she believed songs could keep the sea gentle." Elena closed her eyes. The fragments inside her shifted, clicked into place. A man's laugh, a woman's voice. The warmth of arms she had long thought were only a dream. It was real. All of it. Later, Damien led her to a glass case in his office. Inside, on velvet, lay a collection of artifacts from that summer, a weathered logbook, a broken compass, photographs faded at the edges. He unlocked the case and handed her one of the photographs. It showed a boy of 12 with sharp eyes and a stubborn jaw, standing beside a little girl with bright hair and a smile as wide as the sea. Around her neck gleamed the pendant she now wore. Elena gasped, her fingers trembling around the photo. The girl's eyes were her own. "That's you," Damien said softly. She pressed the photo to her chest, sobbing. The truth, once unbearable, now felt undeniable. As dawn crept across the skyline, Elena stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. For the first time, she felt tethered, not to a shelter cot or a pawn shop or the fragile anonymity of survival, but to something unbreakable. Family. Damien stepped beside her, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The sea stole 20 years from us, but it did not steal you. and I will spend the rest of my life proving that blood, even lost to the waves, can find its way home." Elena turned toward him, tears still shining in her eyes, but now steadied by something deeper: belief. And in that moment, the truth of the sea, once silence, once mystery, finally spoke. The conference room at Hale Global Tower was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the skin like a storm waiting to break. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan glittered as though mocking the darkness that had gathered inside. Elena sat at the head of the long table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She still wasn't used to this. The weight of chairs that once held senators and CEOs now bent to her presence. Hours ago, she had been just a girl in a shelter, a waitress discarded like trash. Now, with the truth of her name carved back into the world, she found herself holding something she had never tasted before: power. At the other end of the table, Vivian Moreau sat trembling. The woman who once slapped Elena in front of New York's elite now looked diminished, stripped of her armor. Her couture blouse was wrinkled, her jewelry dimmed by the fluorescent light, her mascara streaked. She clasped her manicured hands together as though prayer might save her. Damien stood near the window, his arms crossed, his shadow long against the glass. His gaze was steady, sharp, but it did not linger on Vivian. It lingered on Elena. Because tonight, it was not his decision to make. "This is your choice," Damien said quietly, turning to his sister. "You decide what happens to her." The words hung in the air like a gavel. Elena looked at Vivian, the woman who had humiliated her, accused her, destroyed her livelihood without a flicker of remorse. She remembered the sting of the slap, the way the maitre d' had turned against her, the whispers of the crowd. She remembered the hot shame of emptying her pockets for strangers who had already judged her guilty. And now this same woman sat before her, begging for mercy. Vivian's voice cracked. "Please, I was desperate. You don't understand. My debts, the foundation, everything was collapsing. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to what?" Elena cut her off, her voice low but steady. "You didn't mean to ruin me? To make me a spectacle? To turn me into your scapegoat so you could cling to your illusions?" Vivian's tears spilled. I had no choice." Elena's chest tightened. She had grown up with no choice. Abandoned by the sea, left in the system, surviving shift by shift. Vivian, with her penthouses and gala gowns, had dared to claim the same excuse. "You always had a choice," Elena said softly. Damien's voice broke into the silence. "If you wish, Isabella, I can have her prosecuted by morning. Fraud, insurance scams, defamation. With one phone call, she will be finished." Vivian flinched, her body folding inward like paper. Elena turned toward her brother, then back to the trembling woman. The easy choice would have been vengeance. To see Vivian behind bars, her empire reduced to dust. The thought carried a bitter satisfaction. But something inside Elena resisted. She thought of the shelter on West End, of the women curled beneath thin blankets, of the director who gave her a place to rest. She thought of the hungry eyes on the subway, of the children who learned early what it meant to be invisible. Vivian had stolen her dignity, yes, but what if she could be forced to give back? Not to Elena, but to those who lived where Elena had lived? Her first act of power would not be destruction. It would be transformation. Elena lifted her chin, her voice steady. "No prison." Damien's brows furrowed. "You're certain?" "Yes." She turned to Vivian, her eyes sharp as steel. "You will not rot in a cell. You will not vanish into obscurity. That would be too easy." Vivian blinked, confused, trembling. "Then, what?" You will serve, Elena said. Every asset you have left, every dollar, every property, every jewel that isn't fake. It will go to the shelters, the soup kitchens, the women you pretend to host galas for but never see, and you— Elena's voice sharpened, cutting through the air. You will work there, not as a patron, not as a board member, as labor. You will wash dishes, scrub floors, serve meals, for as long as it takes to balance what you've taken. Vivian gasped. You can't— I can! Elena snapped. Her voice, once timid, now rang with authority. Because for once in your life, Vivian Moreau, you will not hide behind chandeliers and fake jewels. You will look the people you ignored in the eyes, and they will know you not as the woman at the gala, but the woman at the sink. Vivian stared at her, stunned, tears dripping silently down her cheeks. Damien's gaze softened. He said nothing, only watched as his sister's first act of justice reshaped the air in the room. The silence stretched until Vivian finally whispered, "And if I refuse?" Elena leaned forward, her pendant glinting against her collarbone. Then Damien calls the press, and your name disappears forever. Vivian's body sagged in defeat. She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing into them. I will, she choked. I will do it. Elena sat back, her chest rising and falling with a weight she hadn't realized she carried. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't forgiveness. It was justice, reshaped by her own hands. After Vivian was escorted out, Damien turned to Elena. His voice was low, reverent. That was mercy. Elena shook her head. No, that was responsibility. Damien studied her, pride flickering in his eyes. You are stronger than I ever was. She looked down at the pendant, then back at him. For years, she had lived as Elena Cross, invisible, powerless. Tonight she had spoken as Isabella Hale, and the city would remember it. That night, alone in her room at Hale Tower, Elena stood before the mirror. The pendant lay against her chest, the silver ring beside it. She touched them both, whispering into the silence, I am not what they tried to make me. I am not their scapegoat. I am my mother's daughter, my father's child, Damien's sister. I am Isabella Hale. The words felt strange, but right. Like a name she had been waiting her whole life to claim. And with that name came responsibility, power, justice. Her first act had been to reshape another woman's fate. Her next would be to reshape her own. The night sky over Manhattan was unusually clear, the stars sharp above the skyline as if even the heavens had paused to witness what was unfolding. In the glass tower that bore his name, Damien Hale stood by the window of his office, watching the city below. But his gaze wasn't fixed on the lights or the movement of traffic. It was fixed on the reflection of the young woman sitting at his desk. His sister Isabella Hale, once Elena Cross, the girl he had thought lost to the sea. For 2 decades, his life had been war, against competitors, against loneliness, against the gnawing guilt of survival. Tonight, for the first time, he felt something other than the emptiness that had defined him. He felt a beginning. Isabella sat quietly, turning the silver pendant over and over in her hand. On the desk beside her lay the ring Damien had kept all these years, gleaming softly under the lamplight, 2 halves of a whole, separated by tragedy, now reunited. Do you remember her song? Isabella asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien closed his eyes. Every word. Her throat tightened. Sing it. He turned, startled. It's been 20 years. I want to hear it, she said, her eyes glistening. Please. Damien hesitated. Then, With a breath that felt like it was breaking something open inside him, he began to sing. His voice was low, roughened by years of silence, but the melody was unmistakable. Sleep, my star, the sea will rest. Close your eyes on mother's breast. Isabella's hand shot to her mouth as the memory unfurled fully in her mind. The storm, the waves. Her mother clutching her close, singing the same lullaby until the sea tore them apart. She sobbed, her body folding in on itself, but she did not let go of the pendant. Damien knelt beside her, his hand trembling as he touched her shoulder. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his own tears breaking free. "Every night, I thought I lost you, but you didn't," Isabella whispered through her sobs. "You found me. After all this time, you found me." They held each other then, not billionaire and waitress, not strangers bound by accident, but brother and sister, the last two survivors of a family the sea had tried to erase. The following morning, Damien gathered the press in the lobby of Hale Tower. Cameras flashed as reporters leaned forward, hungry for the story. They had expected another announcement of a merger, another empire-shaking deal. Instead, Damien stepped to the podium with Isabella at his side. Her hands shook as she faced the sea of flashing lights, but she stood tall. "For years," Damien said into the microphone, his voice steady, "I have carried the weight of a loss I thought permanent. My sister Isabella Hale was taken from me in a storm 20 years ago. I believed she was gone. I believed the sea had won. But I was wrong." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cameras flashed faster. "This is Isabella Hale," Damien continued, placing his hand over hers. "She has lived in the shadows of this city, surviving alone until fate brought us back together. Today, she reclaims her name, and our family reclaims its heart." The cameras captured every moment. Isabella's trembling smile, Damien's steady hand on her shoulder, the glint of the pendant and the ring shining together like twin beacons. That night, alone again in the quiet of Damien's office, Isabella traced the ring and pendant with her fingertips. She thought of the girl she had been, Elena Cross, invisible waitress, orphan with no history. And she thought of the woman she was now, Isabella Hale, survivor, sister, heir to a legacy she had never dared dream of. Her life was no longer just about survival. It was about direction, purpose. She turned to Damien, who was pouring 2 glasses of wine. "What now?" she asked softly. He handed her a glass, his expression thoughtful. "Now we rebuild, not empires, not illusions, but family." Isabella smiled faintly, tears welling again. "I've never had one. Not really." "Now you do," Damien said, his voice breaking with quiet conviction. Later, Damien opened the safe again and placed the ring beside the pendant on the desk. The 2 pieces gleamed side by side, separated for 20 years but now together at last. He looked at Isabella. "These were meant to guide us. A compass and a ring. One to point the way, the other to bind. Our parents believed in symbols." Isabella touched both, her tears falling freely. "For the first time, it feels like the compass is pointing home." Damien's chest tightened. He reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. "Home isn't a place, Isabella. It's us. And we're together now." They sat in silence, watching the city lights shimmer beneath them. 2 survivors tethered not by wealth or power, but by the unbreakable thread of blood and memory. When the world learned of Vivian Moreau's downfall, her jewels exposed as frauds, her fortune diverted to shelters across the city, her hands scrubbing floors in kitchens where no one cared for her name, Isabella did not rejoice. She did not need to. Justice had already been written the night she made her choice. Her real victory was this: she was no longer invisible. She was no longer a scapegoat, a nameless girl carrying a trinket without meaning. She was Isabella Hale, and her story had been restored. On the final night of that long week, Damien and Isabella walked together to the river's edge. The Hudson moved quietly beneath the stars, its waves soft and steady, nothing like the storm that had once shattered their lives. Damien pulled a small silver compass from his pocket, the kind sailors once carried. "I kept this after the wreck," he said. "I thought it was all I had left of you." Isabella took it gently, pressing it into her palm with the pendant and the ring. 3 symbols, each heavy with meaning. She closed her eyes, lifted her face to the night air, and whispered, "For the first time, I know where I belong." And as the city breathed around them, the compass seemed to steady, pointing not to the sea, not to the stars, but to the bond between them, the end. The pendant and the ring lay together on the desk in Hale Tower, glowing softly under the lamplight. Twin relics of a lost past, now anchors of a reclaimed future. Proof that the sea could take years, but never love. Proof that no storm, however violent, could silence blood forever. The compass had found north. And with it, Isabella Hale had found home. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Sometimes life scatters us like waves, and it feels as though the sea has swallowed everything we love. But tonight reminds us of something deeper. Even what we believe lost forever can return. Not always in the way we expect, but in the way we need most. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope. Because just like a compass, even in the darkest nights, love always points us home.